The morning light filtered through the glass walls of Hale Industries, bouncing off the marble floors that Maria had polished just hours before. Her blue uniform caught the faint shimmer of dawn as she pushed her cleaning cart past the conference room. Inside, the air buzzed with laughter, the kind that comes from people who believe they'll never be laughed at. The CEO, Richard Hale, stood in the center, his confidence sharp as the suit he wore. "Hey, Maria!" he called, waving a stack of papers like a trophy. His voice sliced through the room, loud enough to stop every conversation. Maria froze, clutching the handle of her cart. Richard grinned, walking closer, his polished shoes clicking with authority. "I'll give you $100,000 if you can translate this," he declared, shaking the papers for emphasis. The room erupted in laughter, crisp, cruel, echoing through the glass. Assistants and executives turned toward her, some covering their mouths, others smirking openly. Maria stood perfectly still, her face calm but her pulse quickening. The sound of mockery filled every inch of space, bouncing off the sterile walls. To them, she wasn't a woman with a story, just a uniform. Richard leaned forward, smirking. "Come on, Maria, what's the matter? Don't tell me you can't even read it." The words stung, but she said nothing. Instead, her gaze drifted to the reflection of herself on the glass, small, quiet, but unbroken. The mop handle trembled slightly under her fingers, though her eyes remained steady. For a long moment, the office buzzed with whispers. The scent of coffee mingled with the chemical tang of disinfectant. Maria's lips parted slightly, as if deciding whether to speak. One of the younger employees giggled nervously. Richard tilted his head, still holding out the document, confident that she would shrink away. He had no idea what was about to happen. Maria took a breath. The air seemed to still around her. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but clear, in flawless French. "Monsieur Hale, ce document n'est pas un contrat, c'est une erreur." The laughter died mid-breath. Confusion spread like ripples on water. Before anyone could react, she switched effortlessly to Mandarin, then Arabic, each word flowing with precision. The office fell into complete silence. Richard blinked, the smirk fading from his face. Every head turned, eyes wide, as Maria continued to speak. 9 languages in total, each one as natural as breathing. The arrogance in the room dissolved, replaced by disbelief and shame. Even the air seemed heavier now, charged with a quiet power that no one expected. When she stopped, Maria looked up at Richard, her voice calm and steady. "You owe me $100,000, she said simply. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Somewhere behind her, someone gasped softly. Richard's face turned pale, his mouth opening but finding no words. Maria didn't wait for his response. She placed the document neatly on his desk and turned toward her cart, her steps slow but certain. The only sound was the faint hum of the fluorescent lights and the steady rhythm of her shoes against the tile. In that silence, power had changed hands. Quietly, irreversibly. What would you have done if you were Maria? Would you have stayed silent or spoken your truth? Before we find out what led to this moment, let's go back to the nights of marble floors, loneliness, and the dreams she thought she had lost. Long after the office lights dimmed and the laughter faded, Maria remained. Her mop glided across the marble floors she knew better than her own reflection. Each streak of water shimmered under the fluorescent glow like traces of her existence, erased every morning by footsteps that never noticed her. The building was silent now, except for the distant hum of elevators and the whisper of her broom. In that silence, she found both peace and loneliness. Every night felt the same, a rhythm of repetition and invisibility. She moved through hallways filled with portraits of men who never learned her name. Their smiles were frozen in frames, symbols of success and ego. Maria cleaned beneath them. With quiet defiance, her back aching but her spirit unbroken. The faint smell of lemon cleaner mixed with the metallic scent of the city creeping through the vents. It was a life reduced to motions, yet her mind wandered elsewhere. Sometimes she imagined the marble turning into chalkboards again, her hands writing on them with confidence. She could almost hear the echo of her voice, lecturing about syntax and semantics, the laughter of her students, the rustle of notebooks. The memory warmed her, then hurt her, like touching sunlight after years in shadow. But she kept those thoughts tucked behind her quiet eyes. To everyone else, she was just the cleaning lady. In the locker room, her small metal compartment was filled with tiny fragments of the past, a worn notebook, a photo of Sophia with a missing front tooth, and an old ID card from her university. She would trace her finger over the faded text, Professor Maria Alvarez, Department of Linguistics. It no longer opened doors, but it still opened something inside her heart. She folded it carefully, like a relic of another lifetime. At midnight, she often paused by the panoramic windows overlooking the city. Lights flickered in distant apartments, each one holding a story, a voice, a dream. She wondered how many others were cleaning those windows, unseen, unheard. A soft drizzle began outside, leaving trails on the glass that mirrored her own reflection. Blurred, layered, invisible. For a moment, she pressed her hand against the cold pane, grounding herself in the present. The hum of the vacuum cleaner drowned out her thoughts, but it couldn't silence her longing. Sometimes she whispered words in different languages while she worked, as if keeping her mind alive through the rhythm of speech. Bonjour, guten Abend, konbanha. The sounds filled the empty halls like ghosts of her former life. The words comforted her, wrapping around her like a quiet promise she hadn't yet given up on. When the clock struck 2, she sat for a moment on the stairs, rubbing her sore hands. The cleaning solution had roughened her skin, but her touch was still gentle when she looked at Sophia's picture. "Someday," she murmured softly in Spanish, "you won't have to see me like this." Her voice trembled slightly, carried away by the cold air conditioning. The city outside slept, but inside Maria, something refused to rest. Before leaving, she walked through the main lobby, a cathedral of glass and steel where success was worshipped. The floors gleamed under her care, yet no one ever wondered who made them shine. She looked up at the towering company logo and smiled faintly, almost defiantly. She didn't need them to see her worth. She only needed to remember it herself. But memory, like light, faded too easily. As she locked the storage room, she heard distant laughter from the executive floor. Someone was still there, celebrating something trivial and loud. She tightened her grip on the keys, feeling a quiet anger she never allowed herself to show. Then she exhaled, steady and silent, and walked out into the night. The moonlight washed over her, softening the weight she carried. Outside, the cool air met her face, carrying the faint scent of rain and asphalt. Maria looked up at the skyline, towers of power she cleaned but never entered. Somewhere, her daughter was sleeping, dreaming of better things. Maria whispered a goodnight in every language she knew, each one a prayer, each one a promise. Then she disappeared into the quiet streets, like the woman no one saw. Long before the marble floors and empty glances, there was a different kind of light in Maria's life. The warm glow of classroom windows filled with the hum of learning. Chalk dust floated in the air like tiny galaxies as she moved between rows of students. Her voice carried confidence, patience, and joy. Languages spilled from her lips with effortless grace. Back then, Maria wasn't invisible. She was admired, respected, alive. Her students adored her. They brought her coffee during long study sessions, called her professora, and filled her office with laughter. Books lined every wall, written in French, Mandarin, Arabic and Latin. The pages smelled of ink and curiosity. She believed knowledge could connect any heart in the world, no matter how distant. It was a simple faith, one she would later pay dearly for. Her husband, Daniel, often waited for her after lectures, leaning against the old university gates. He had a soft smile and a mind filled with impossible dreams. They would walk home hand in hand through the cobbled streets, talking about Sophia, their little girl who could already say hello in 3 languages. Life was modest, but it was theirs. The world felt generous then, kind even. But kindness has limits when illness arrives. Daniel's cough started small, then deepened into something dark and relentless. Hospitals replaced classrooms, and bills replaced dreams. Maria sold jewelry, books, anything that wasn't essential. She translated documents at night to cover treatments, yet no amount of words could heal him. The sound of ventilators replaced the laughter of her students. When he passed, the house felt like a hollow shell. Sophia was too young to understand why her mother cried over old lecture notes. Maria's university contract ended soon after. Budget cuts, they said. But she knew the truth. No one wanted a grieving widow with too much experience and not enough compliance. She packed her degrees in a box and closed the door on her old life. One rainy afternoon, she stood at the airport holding Sophia's hand. The terminal smelled of coffee and jet fuel. Over the loudspeaker, languages overlapped. English, German, Italian, voices blending into a strange symphony. Maria felt a spark of irony. She understood every word, yet had never felt so lost. When the flight attendant announced boarding, she took one last look at her homeland, then stepped into the unknown. The plane lifted through the clouds, and Sophia slept against her arm, clutching a small stuffed rabbit. Maria stared out the window, watching the land disappear beneath a sea of white. She whispered to herself in Spanish, promising that this sacrifice would mean something, that someday her daughter would stand where she could not. It was both a vow and a prayer. The first years in America were brutal. Maria worked odd jobs, laundry, kitchens, warehouses, wherever her accent didn't matter. The weight of exhaustion became her constant companion. At night, when Sophia was asleep, Maria studied, not to survive, but to remember. She wrote translations on napkins and whispered idioms under her breath, afraid her mind might rust away. Sometimes she would pass by universities, watching students hurry inside with backpacks and coffee cups. Through the glass, she glimpsed professors setting up projectors, chalking formulas, greeting students, a world that used to belong to her. She would smile faintly, then walk on. Each step away felt like an exile that never ended. Yet something inside her refused to die completely. And so, the woman who once lectured about the power of language learned a new dialect, silence. But even silence has tone, depth, and meaning. In every word she didn't say, there lived 1,000 she still remembered. Those memories, like old melodies, stayed buried deep within her, waiting for the moment when someone, anyone, would finally listen again. The city greeted Maria not with warmth, but with noise. Horns blared, sirens wailed, and strangers brushed past her as if she were part of the pavement. The skyscrapers towered above like silent judges, their mirrored windows reflecting a life she didn't belong to. She clutched Sophia's hand tightly as they stepped out of the bus station, both of them wrapped in second-hand coats. It was the first day of their new life, and the cold bit hard. They found a tiny apartment near the edge of downtown, a place where the walls hummed with the sound of distant traffic. The heater coughed more than it worked, and the kitchen light flickered like a nervous heartbeat. Yet Maria smiled when she unpacked a single box of books, the last remnants of her past. She placed them gently on a rickety shelf, as if building a sanctuary. "We'll be fine," she whispered, though her eyes said otherwise. The first job she found was cleaning offices overnight. The agency didn't ask questions. They only cared that she showed up on time and didn't talk too much. Maria signed the contract with shaking hands, her name written neatly in blue ink. She was grateful, but the irony stung. A woman who once taught linguistics, now reduced to scrubbing floors for people who couldn't pronounce her last name. Still, she smiled and thanked them in perfect English. Her nights became a pattern of silence and motion. The echo of her mop against the tiles replaced the applause of students. The scent of disinfectant clung to her clothes like an unwanted memory. Sometimes, when she caught her reflection in the office glass, she barely recognized the woman looking back. Tired eyes, hair pulled tight, a posture that spoke of quiet endurance. Yet behind that stillness lived the same sharp mind, restless and alive. Sophia adapted faster than her mother. She learned English through cartoons and schoolyard laughter, switching languages like second nature. "Mom, it's easy," she'd say, proudly teaching Maria new phrases. Maria laughed softly, hiding her ache. She had dreamed of teaching her daughter the beauty of words. Now the child was teaching her how to survive them. Life, she realized, was fluent in irony. There were moments, though rare, when the city felt almost kind, like when the morning light spilled across the skyline, or when an old woman at the bus stop smiled and offered her coffee. Maria cherished those brief connections, fragments of humanity amid the concrete storm. In them, she found the courage to keep going, one shift at a time. Still, she missed the rhythm of academia, the quiet pulse of libraries, the debates, the smell of chalk. To fill the void, she listened to podcasts in different languages as she cleaned, earbuds hidden beneath her hair. German news, Italian literature, Arabic poetry. Each voice kept her mind alive, whispering, "You are still more than this." Those languages became her secret rebellion. At work, most people didn't even notice her. Some nodded politely, others ignored her completely. But there was one thing Maria noticed, the hierarchy of sight. Executives walked fast and spoke loud, while cleaners like her moved silently, erasing their traces. It was a dance she'd learned to master, exist without taking up space. Still, sometimes she wondered what it would feel like to be seen again. One night, she found an old contract left behind on a desk. It was written in French and poorly translated. Out of habit, she corrected the errors on a scrap of paper. Her handwriting elegant and sure. When she finished, she caught herself smiling. For a moment, she was the professor again. Then she folded the note, slipped it into her pocket, and went back to mopping. Her secret victory. As the months passed, the building began to feel like another language she was forced to learn, full of rules, silence, and hidden meanings. Maria mastered it quietly, speaking through her work, through her patience, through the way she carried dignity even in the smallest gestures. She didn't know it yet, but someone would soon notice her, not for her silence, but for the power buried beneath it. Richard Hale believed the world belonged to men who refused to bend. His reflection in the glass walls of his office pleased him, sharp suit, sharper jawline, and a smile that had closed million-dollar deals. Every morning he walked through the building like a storm in control of its own lightning. People parted when he passed, voices dropping, eyes avoiding. Respect and fear, he thought, were just two names for power. He had built his empire young, rising through charm and aggression. The magazines called him a visionary. His employees called him Sir. But behind the polished image lived a constant unease, a gnawing sense that he was one mistake away from becoming ordinary. He buried that fear beneath sarcasm and control. When he laughed, it was always a little too loud, a little too forced. Richard's office sat on the top floor, lined with glass that overlooked the city. From there, he watched the world like a god surveying his domain. Yet beneath the luxury, the whiskey, the tailored suits, the endless meetings, there was loneliness. Success had surrounded him with people who wanted his approval, not his truth. And truth, he decided long ago, was bad for business. He noticed Maria for the first time one late evening, long after most had gone home. She was quietly cleaning near his office, humming something soft in Spanish. The sound bothered him, not because it was unpleasant, but because it was human. "You missed a spot," he said curtly, without looking at her. Maria simply nodded, wiping the corner again. For a reason he couldn't explain, her silence unsettled him. The next morning, he complained to his assistant Claire that the cleaning staff was too comfortable. Claire, always cautious, replied, "Sir, Maria is actually very professional. She's not like the others." Richard scoffed. "She's a janitor, Claire. They're all the same." But her words lingered longer than he wanted to admit. Something about that woman's calm composure had felt defiant. During meetings, Richard demanded perfection. He ridiculed small mistakes and praised no one. Fear, he believed, produced results. But lately, he noticed the office energy shifting. Laughter dulled, eyes averted. He didn't care. As long as the profits soared, emotions were irrelevant. Yet when he passed Maria in the hall, she would glance up just once with an expression he couldn't read. It wasn't fear. It was something steadier. He began to notice her everywhere, polishing the conference table, restocking supplies, walking quietly through reflections of glass and steel. Her presence was constant, yet invisible to everyone else. It irritated him, though he didn't know why. Perhaps it was the dignity she carried, even while wearing gloves and carrying a mop. Perhaps it reminded him of what he'd lost trying to climb. One afternoon, while discussing an international contract, Richard snapped at his translation team. The documents were delayed again, and he needed results. "How hard can it be to translate a few pages?" he barked. The team stared at the table, avoiding his gaze. "Idiots," he muttered, tossing the papers aside. He didn't know that fate was already arranging its quiet revenge through the woman he refused to see. That evening, he found Maria again, cleaning near the boardroom. She didn't look up as he walked by, her movement steady and deliberate. He paused, watching her for a moment longer than usual. "You like this job?" he asked, his tone half curious, half mocking. Maria shrugged. "It's honest work." Her answer annoyed him. Honesty was something he couldn't afford. As he turned away, Richard smirked to himself. To him, she was a background detail in the masterpiece of his success. But every empire has cracks, small, silent, invisible, until the moment they break. And somewhere deep in the rhythm of her quiet labor, Maria was already becoming the fault line. The morning meeting began like any other. A battlefield disguised as a boardroom. The table gleamed, coffee cups steamed, and a dozen nervous faces waited for Richard Hale's verdict. He paced at the head of the room, a restless predator. "We are losing time," he snapped, slapping a thick folder onto the table. "Do you realize this contract has been sitting untranslated for 3 days?" His voice struck like a whip, sharp and cold. The translation team exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, a young man in glasses, stammered, "Sir, it's a complex document, multiple languages." Richard cut him off. "Then maybe I should hire people who actually speak them." Laughter rippled faintly among the higher ranks, more out of fear than amusement. The air felt heavy with humiliation. No one dared meet his eyes. As the meeting dragged on, frustration gnawed at Richard. His empire was built on speed, control, perfection. And now, this small delay felt like rebellion. He dismissed the team with a wave of his hand, muttering about incompetence. When he stepped into the hallway, his pulse still raced. The sound of a mop squeaking against the floor greeted him. Maria was there, as always, quietly cleaning, head bowed. An impulse, cruel, reckless, took hold of him. He walked toward her, the untranslated contract clutched in his hand. "Hey," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You understand languages, right? You must, after all this time, cleaning after people." The sarcasm hit like a slap. Maria froze, her back still turned. He tossed the papers onto her cart, the pages scattering like wounded birds. "I'll give you $100,000 if you can translate that," Richard sneered. A few employees nearby stopped to watch, laughter already bubbling in their throats. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a harsh white glow on the absurdity unfolding. Maria turned slowly, her face unreadable, her eyes dark and calm. "Is that so?" she said softly. Her calmness irritated him even more. "Yes, that's so," he said, stepping closer. "You translate that, and the money's yours. Though I doubt you can even read it." His words floated in the air, poisoned and sharp. Around them, the small crowd of spectators chuckled, exchanging glances like children watching a cruel game. Maria didn't flinch. She only looked at the papers, then at him. For a long, still moment, she said nothing. The silence stretched thin, heavy enough to make even the bystanders shift uneasily. Richard smirked, certain he'd won this petty moment of dominance. He thrived on silence. It meant submission, but Maria's silence wasn't fear. It was waiting. Her eyes met his with quiet steadiness, and something in that gaze unsettled him. Then she picked up the papers and placed them neatly back into a stack. $100,000, she repeated, her tone calm, almost casual. "You should be careful with promises, Mr. Hale. Some people take words very seriously." Her accent was soft, deliberate, the kind of precision that didn't belong to ignorance. The laughter faded slightly, replaced by murmurs of surprise. Richard opened his mouth to retort, but the elevator doors opened behind him, spilling more employees into the scene. The moment had already turned into gossip, feeding through the corridors like wildfire. "Did you hear what the boss said to the cleaning lady? She's supposed to translate something for $100,000. The words spread faster than he could stop them. He'd made a spectacle, and deep down he knew it. Maria gathered her cleaning tools and quietly moved on, her composure unbroken. The papers remained on her cart, their edges fluttering like a challenge waiting to be answered. As Richard watched her disappear down the hallway, something unfamiliar twisted in his chest. Irritation, yes, but also unease. He didn't know it yet, but that careless dare had just awakened a storm he could never control. That night, Maria walked home under a sky heavy with rain. The city lights shimmered on the wet pavement, reflections of lives brighter than hers. Each step echoed softly, her shoes soaked, her body exhausted. She carried no anger, only a deep, tired ache that spread through her chest like cold air. The folder with Richard's documents sat in her bag, silent, daring her to open it. Inside their small apartment, Sophia sat at the kitchen table, drawing stars on a piece of paper. She looked up and smiled when her mother entered. "You're late again, Mama," she said gently. Maria brushed her daughter's hair back, trying to hide the fatigue in her eyes. "Just a long day, mi amor." The smell of soup simmering on the stove wrapped the room in quiet comfort. After dinner, while Sophia read her schoolbook aloud, Maria's gaze wandered to the bag resting on the counter. The papers seemed to hum with invisible weight. "What is it, Mama?" Sophia asked, noticing her distraction. "Nothing, just work," Maria replied, forcing a smile. But inside her mind stirred, words, alphabets, fragments of forgotten fluency whispering to her. When Sophia fell asleep, Maria sat alone by the window, the city humming below. She pulled the folder out, spreading the papers across the small table. French, Mandarin, Arabic, a complex merger contract riddled with errors. Her fingers trembled slightly as she read, but soon instinct took over. Her mind, once dulled by exhaustion, woke like an old engine catching fire. Each paragraph she translated brought back a piece of herself. The structure of sentences, the beauty of rhythm. It was like rediscovering an old melody she thought she'd forgotten. The cheap lamp flickered, casting golden shadows over her focused face. In the stillness, Maria wasn't a cleaner anymore. She was a teacher again, a scholar, a woman reclaiming her name. Outside, thunder rolled across the skyline. Maria barely noticed. She wrote in tight, elegant lines, whispering phrases under her breath in different tongues. Her hands moved quickly, confidently, until she finished the last page. When she looked up, dawn had begun to soften the edges of the horizon. A quiet smile formed on her lips, not pride, but recognition. She was still her. She placed the papers back in the folder and exhaled, the air trembling with relief. In the soft morning light, her reflection in the window looked different, stronger somehow. "You see, Daniel," she murmured softly in Spanish, "I didn't forget." Her voice cracked slightly, but the warmth in it lingered. For the first time in years, she felt awake. As the city stirred to life, Maria prepared breakfast for Sophia. The little girl hugged her tightly before school, her small hands leaving faint crumbs of toast on her mother's uniform. "You're smiling today," she said with a giggle. Maria kissed her forehead. "Because sometimes, Mija, you just have to remember who you are." The words hung in the air like sunlight. When she arrived at work that evening, whispers trailed behind her, echoes of the morning's humiliation. Some employees smirked, others looked away, ashamed. Maria greeted them all with calm courtesy, her eyes betraying nothing. The folder was no longer just a burden. It was her quiet answer, folded neatly inside her cart. That night, as she polished the endless hallway, Maria looked at her reflection in the marble floor. The woman staring back wasn't broken. She was waiting, patient, composed, and ready. The storm would come soon enough, and when it did, she would meet it head-on, not with fury, but with truth. And for the first time, the silence around her didn't feel empty. It felt powerful. The next morning, the air inside Hale Industries felt charged, like the calm seconds before a storm breaks. Maria walked through the revolving doors with quiet determination, the folder tucked beneath her arm. Sunlight spilled across the lobby, glinting off glass and chrome. The same executives who had laughed yesterday now whispered as she passed. Her footsteps were steady, unhurried, almost ceremonial. She rode the elevator to the top floor, surrounded by reflections of herself in polished metal. Her heart beat fast, but her face revealed nothing. She thought of Sophia's smile, of Daniel's voice telling her never to shrink for anyone. As the doors opened, the hum of morning chatter filled the air. Beyond the glass wall, Richard Hale was already in the meeting room, laughing too loudly as always. Maria entered without knocking. The laughter faltered, but didn't stop. "Ah, our translator has arrived," Richard said mockingly, leaning back in his chair. "Did you come for your 100 grand?" The room erupted in chuckles. Maria didn't answer. She placed the folder gently on the table, her movements slow and deliberate. The scent of her cleaning solution still lingered faintly, the smell of invisibility. Richard leaned forward, eyes glinting with arrogance. "Well, let's see this miracle," he said. Maria opened the folder and spread out the translated pages. Her handwriting was precise, elegant, filled with notes correcting the company's earlier errors. One of the executives frowned, scanning the lines. "Sir," he whispered nervously, "she's right. These are accurate." But Maria wasn't finished. She began to speak, her voice calm, steady, and melodic. "This section here," she said in perfect French, "contains a misinterpretation that could cost your company millions." Then, without pause, she shifted seamlessly into Mandarin, explaining the clause again. Gasps filled the room. Every sentence she spoke carried the weight of intellect and grace. The laughter died completely. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to fade. Maria continued, moving through Arabic, Russian, Portuguese, and Japanese, each word flowing effortlessly, her accent flawless. Pens dropped, chairs creaked, and every eye locked on her. The power in the room shifted, subtle but absolute. The woman they mocked was now commanding the room. Richard's smile faltered. For the first time in years, he was speechless. He reached for the papers, scanning them with disbelief, his hand trembling slightly. Maria stood still, her chin lifted, her gaze calm but unyielding. "You asked for a translation," she said quietly, "and I gave you one, in 9 languages." The words cut through the air like glass. Silence stretched between them. No one dared move. Then, slowly, Maria gathered the pages, stacked them neatly, and placed them before him. "You owe me $100,000, she said simply. The line wasn't a boast. It was truth, delivered like a verdict. Somewhere in the corner, someone exhaled audibly, breaking the spell. Richard tried to laugh, but the sound came out brittle. "It was just a joke," he stammered, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Maria didn't respond. She turned, her gaze sweeping across the faces that had laughed at her. None could meet her eyes. For the first time she was seen, not as a cleaner, not as a joke, but as something far greater. As she walked out, the room remained silent, frozen in awe. The echo of her. Footsteps filled the corridor like music, deliberate and powerful. Outside, the morning sun spilled through the windows, painting her path in gold. What began as humiliation had become revelation. And though she didn't smile, a quiet fire burned behind her calm expression, the fire of someone who had finally spoken her truth. For a long, breathless moment, the office stayed frozen. The ticking of the clock sounded louder than any heartbeat. Richard Hale sat motionless at the head of the table, the folder of translated pages before him. His fingers hovered above the papers as if they might burn him. Around him, a dozen pairs of eyes darted nervously between him and Maria's empty chair. The laughter that once filled this room had turned to dust. The youngest executive broke the silence first, his voice trembling. "Sir." She was right. The French clause was misinterpreted. It changes the whole deal. He hesitated, afraid to meet Richard's gaze. Another employee nodded, whispering, "And the Mandarin version, it's perfect." She caught every nuance. Their words echoed softly, each one tightening the vice of humiliation around Richard's chest. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair, as though trying to erase the moment. His reflections stared back at him from the polished table, not the untouchable CEO, but a man undone by his own arrogance. His throat tightened. "It was just a joke," he muttered, though even to his own ears it sounded pitiful. No one laughed this time. From the hallway, muffled voices began to rise, gossip spreading like wildfire. "Did you see her? She spoke 9 languages. I thought she was just the cleaning lady. Turns out she used to be a professor." Each whispered word stung more than the last. Richard's empire, built on image and intimidation, was cracking under the weight of a single woman's dignity. He stood abruptly, pushing the chair back with a harsh scrape. "Meeting's over," he barked, though no one moved. The papers on the table fluttered from the sudden motion, a single sheet landing on the floor by his feet. He stared at it, her handwriting, clean and confident, and for the first time he felt small. The kind of small that success could never fix. Outside, Maria moved quietly through the corridor, the sound of her steps echoing like a metronome of control. She didn't hurry, didn't gloat. She only carried herself with the same quiet grace that had always been hers. A few employees watched her pass, eyes wide with something new, respect, maybe even awe. No one laughed now. Back inside the boardroom, Richard felt the weight of the stairs around him. "Get back to work," he snapped, though his voice had lost its edge. Claire, his assistant, lingered by the door, her expression unreadable. "Sir," she said softly, "you should apologize." The words cut sharper than any insult. He didn't respond. The apology lodged somewhere between his pride and his shame. Hours later, when the office began to empty, Richard stayed behind. The city lights glowed through the windows, reflecting his hollow silhouette. He poured himself a drink, the amber liquid trembling in the glass. For the first time in years, he couldn't escape his own reflection. He thought of Maria's calm voice, her certainty, her eyes that had looked right through him. He wanted to be angry, at her, at his staff, at anyone but himself. Yet the truth gnawed deeper. He had mocked what he could never understand. All his power, all his money, meant nothing against the kind of strength that came from humility and knowledge. He had seen it up close, and it terrified him. Downstairs, Maria stepped out of the building into the cool evening air. The city buzzed around her, unaware of the quiet revolution she had just set in motion. She adjusted her coat, looking up at the glowing windows above. Somewhere behind that glass, a man was learning his first real lesson. Maria exhaled slowly, the night wind brushing her face like peace. The storm had broken, and she had walked right through it. The next morning, Maria arrived at work before sunrise. The hallways were empty, filled only with the faint hum of machines and the soft rhythm of her steps. The night storm had passed, but its echo lingered in every corner of the building. People looked at her differently now, cautious, curious, uncertain. Respect had a strange silence to it. When she entered the break room, 2 employees stopped talking mid-sentence. They nodded awkwardly before hurrying out, their eyes avoiding hers. Maria sighed softly and poured herself a cup of coffee. The steam rose in curls, fogging her glasses. For years she had dreamed of being seen. Now that she was, the attention felt heavier than invisibility. By mid-morning, word had spread to every department. The cleaning lady who spoke 9 languages, the janitor who corrected the CEO. The whispers followed her like a shadow, not cruel anymore, but filled with awe and disbelief. Maria continued her work, unbothered, her movements precise and calm. She had spent too long earning peace to let gossip disturb it now. Around noon, Claire approached her quietly. "He wants to see you," she said, her tone softer than usual. Maria nodded, wiping her hands on her uniform. The walk to Richard's office felt endless, a corridor lined with glass and judgment. When she entered, he was standing by the window, back turned, staring out at the skyline. His reflection looked smaller than she remembered. "Maria," he began, his voice measured but uneasy, "yesterday got out of hand." He turned, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I didn't mean to offend you." Maria met his gaze without anger. "You didn't offend me," she said quietly. "You revealed yourself." The words landed like soft thunder, not shouted but impossible to ignore. Richard's composure cracked. He sank into his chair, rubbing his temples. "I was stupid," he admitted. "I underestimated you." Maria studied him for a moment, here expression unreadable. "You underestimate everyone who serves you," she said simply. "That's how people like you stay blind." Her tone wasn't the truth spoken by someone who had lived it. For a long moment neither spoke. The city outside gleamed through the glass, indifferent to the conversation. Finally, Richard said, "You were a teacher, weren't you?" Maria nodded. "Once, until life taught me harder lessons." The room fell quiet again, heavy with unspoken things. For the first time, he didn't look at her as background. He looked at her as a person. When she left the office, Claire stopped her in the hall. What did he say? She whispered. Maria smiled faintly. Nothing important. Some lessons don't need translation. Then she walked on, her footsteps calm, steady, unhurried. Behind her, the glass doors closed with a soft click, the sound of a chapter ending. That afternoon, as Maria cleaned the conference room, she found the same folder still on the table. This time, there was an envelope on top of it. Inside was a check, not for $100,000, but for 1 month's bonus. No note, no message. She folded it neatly and placed it back where she found it. Some debts, she thought, couldn't be paid in money. When the day ended, she lingered by the windows, watching the city turn gold in the sunset. Her reflection blended with the skyline. Not invisible anymore, but part of something larger. The humiliation, the laughter, the storm, all of it had led here, to this quiet truth. Respect wasn't given, it was remembered. And Maria, at last, had remembered herself. The following week unfolded in uneasy quiet. Conversation stopped when Maria entered a room, replaced by half-smiles and guilty glances. The same people who once ignored her now greeted her politely, their voices tinged with awkward respect. She accepted it all with calm grace, neither proud nor bitter. Dignity, she had learned, didn't need an audience. In the executive floor, Richard Hale moved through his days like a man walking on glass. Every meeting, every decision, carried the echo of his public humiliation. He avoided Maria's eyes whenever they crossed paths, yet her presence lingered in his thoughts. Something about her composure unsettled him. Not her intelligence, but her lack of resentment. It was a strength he couldn't buy. One morning, he called Claire into his office. "I want to make things right," he said abruptly. "Find her. Offer her something better." Claire raised an eyebrow. "Better?" "A promotion," he replied, his voice unsure. "Senior maintenance supervisor, or whatever title fits. She deserves recognition." Claire hesitated but nodded. "Recognition or redemption, sir?" He didn't answer. Later that day, Maria was summoned to the top floor again. She arrived quietly, her uniform spotless, her hair tied neatly. Richard gestured for her to sit, but she remained standing. "You've worked here a long time," he began, his tone rehearsed. "You've shown unusual skills. I'd like to offer you a new position, better pay, better hours." His words floated awkwardly in the air. Maria listened without interrupting. When he finished, she tilted her head slightly. "A better cleaning job?" she asked. Her voice wasn't mocking, it was soft, almost curious. Richard hesitated, caught off guard by her composure. "It's a start," he said. She smiled faintly. "I already had a career once, Mr. Hale. This one only pays the bills." The truth in her tone left no room for pity. Richard shifted uncomfortably, adjusting his cufflinks. "I'm trying to make amends," he muttered. Maria nodded. "Then start by respecting people before they have to prove you wrong." The words were gentle, but they carried weight. He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came. She turned to leave, pausing only to add, "Not every lesson fits into a paycheck." As she stepped out, the office was quiet enough to hear the hum of the air vents. Claire stood nearby, watching with quiet admiration. "He tried," she whispered as Maria passed. "Yes," Maria said without stopping, "but only because everyone was watching." Her footsteps echoed down the hallway, soft, steady, final. By evening, the news of the promotion offer had spread through the building. Some praised Richard for humility, others called it damage control. Maria ignored it all. She scrubbed the marble floors with the same precision as always, her movements calm and unhurried. She didn't need validation. Her victory had never been about status. It was about truth. That night, as she walked home under a fading sky, Sophia ran up to meet her, waving a school flyer. "Mama, they're looking for parents to help with language tutoring." Maria's heart stirred. "They need someone who speaks French, Spanish, maybe Arabic," Sophia said proudly. For the first time, Maria felt something bloom, the gentle spark of a door reopening. At home, she sat by the window after dinner, looking at the city lights flickering in the distance. The world hadn't changed, not really, but she had. Power wasn't loud or cruel, it was quiet, patient, and rooted in self-respect. Somewhere deep down, Maria knew this wasn't the end of her story. It was the moment she began to rewrite it. The week after the confrontation felt different, lighter, quieter, almost expectant. Maria moved through the corridors with her usual grace, but now people looked her in the eye. Some greeted her softly, others stepped aside, unsure whether to apologize or stay silent. For the first time, she felt seen not as a curiosity, but as a presence. Respect didn't erase the past, but it softened its edges. One afternoon, while she was cleaning the conference room, her phone buzzed with a call from Sophia's school. The teacher's voice was warm, eager. "Mrs. Alvarez, we heard you speak multiple languages. Would you be interested in helping our international students?" Maria's hand stilled mid-motion, her heart skipping a beat. "Yes," she said quietly, almost whispering it into existence. "Yes, I would." When she arrived home that evening, Sophia was waiting at the door, waving a permission slip. "They want you to teach, Mama," she said with a grin that could light up the entire apartment. Maria laughed, pulling her daughter into a tight embrace. The scent of chalk, the echo of classrooms, the rhythm of learning, all the memories she had buried began to rise again, like sunlight through dust. The next day, she told Claire about it, while waiting for the elevator. "That's wonderful," Claire said genuinely. "You should take it." Maria smiled. "It's just volunteering." Claire shook her head. "That's how everything good starts. Small, unpaid, and full of meaning." Maria looked at her reflection in the elevator door, seeing not a janitor, but a woman standing at the edge of renewal. Later that week, during her evening shift, the HR director approached her with a tentative smile. "Maria, I've been meaning to ask, would you consider applying for a translator position here? We've opened a new department for multilingual communications." Maria blinked, caught between disbelief and quiet amusement. "You mean me?" "Yes," the woman said softly. "You've already proven yourself." She went home that night with the city lights flickering around her like stars reflected in puddles. Sophia was asleep, her small hand resting on an open book. Maria brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's face and whispered, "We're almost there, mi amor." For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like survival. It felt like possibility. The following Monday, she walked into HR for the interview. Her uniform was pressed, her answers calm and thoughtful. They asked about her experience, and she told them about the university, the teaching, the years she had spent learning in silence. Every word she spoke carried weight, not because of pride, but because of truth. The panel listened, attentive, humbled. When she left the office, Richard was standing by the window in the hallway. Their eyes met briefly. There was no arrogance in his gaze now, only recognition. "Good luck, Maria," he said quietly. She nodded once, neither forgiving nor resenting, she replied. "Is just preparation meeting its moment." And then she walked on. By the end of the week, the offer came through. Official translator, full-time, with benefits, and her name printed on the doorplate. When she saw it, she smiled. Not wide, not loud, just enough for herself. Sophia cried when she heard, wrapping her arms around her mother's waist. "You did it, Mama." "No," Maria whispered softly. "That night, we did." She stood by the window, the city glowing beneath her like an open book. The skyline no longer looked foreign. It looked like something she had earned her place in. She thought of Daniel, of the promises whispered years ago across oceans. "We made it," she said into the quiet, her voice trembling with gratitude. The turning point had come, not as a miracle, but as the steady reward of endurance. The first weeks in her new position felt surreal. Maria no longer pushed a cart. Through silent corridors, she walked with purpose, carrying folders and notebooks instead of mops and polish. Her desk faced a wide window that bathed her workspace in soft morning light. The nameplate, Maria Alvarez, translator, gleamed subtly against the wood. Every time she saw it, she had to stop herself from touching it just to make sure it was real. Her co-workers treated her differently now, but what struck her most was the tone. Not pity, not guilt, but genuine respect. She offered help where it was needed, corrected translations, and even taught colleagues simple greetings in other languages. The office buzzed with curiosity and warmth whenever she spoke. Once invisible, Maria had become the quiet center of a new kind of attention, one built on admiration, not hierarchy. Richard watched these changes from a distance. Each day, as he passed her office, he'd glance inside, curious but unsure how to approach. The arrogance that once defined him now felt like a costume he no longer fit into. He noticed how people lingered near her desk, laughing, learning, asking questions. The atmosphere in the company was changing, lighter, more human, and it began with her. One evening, he found her still working long after everyone else had left. She was correcting a contract in Spanish, her pen gliding gracefully across the page. "You should go home," he said quietly from the doorway. Maria didn't look up. "I used to clean these halls at this hour," she replied. "Now I just clean the words." Her tone was soft, not bitter. For the first time he smiled genuinely. Over the next few weeks, Maria began offering language workshops to interns after hours. She turned the old break room into a makeshift classroom, drawing on whiteboards, her voice filled with warmth and patience. Laughter echoed through the hallways as young employees practiced accents and phrases. Watching them, she felt something reawaken, not ambition but purpose. Teaching had always been her truest home. One evening, Richard lingered by the doorway, listening. He heard her explain the subtle poetry of translation, how every language carries a soul, and every word is an act of connection. Her students hung on every syllable. When the session ended, he stepped inside. "They love learning from you," he said awkwardly. Maria looked at him, eyes calm. "Because I love teaching them." There was a pause, quiet and heavy with unspoken truths. "I never thanked you," Richard said finally, "for what you did, for showing me who I was." Maria studied his face, the tiredness around his eyes, the humility struggling to emerge. "You don't owe me thanks," she said gently. "Just do better." Her forgiveness wasn't spoken, but it hung there, delicate and complete. From that day on, Richard began to change. Meetings grew less hostile. Mistakes were met with patience instead of ridicule. He started greeting janitors by name, holding doors, asking questions. It wasn't a transformation born of guilt, but of understanding. He had witnessed real power, the kind that spoke softly and carried truth instead of pride. Maria noticed the difference, but said nothing. She simply continued her work, content to let her actions ripple quietly. Every signed contract she translated, every intern she guided, every kind word she offered, it all felt like redemption in motion. Not revenge, but renewal. And as she walked home one evening, the golden light of sunset catching her hair, she realized something profound. Redemption was never about changing the past. It was about reclaiming who you were before the world tried to make you forget. The company's annual gala arrived with glittering lights and polished speeches. The ballroom shimmered with gold decor, glasses chiming and laughter flowing through the air like champagne. Maria had been invited officially this year, not as staff but as a guest. Her simple blue dress contrasted the sequined gowns around her, yet somehow she stood out effortlessly. She didn't need luxury to command presence. Grace did that for her. Richard Hale moved through the crowd like a man rehearsing redemption. His smile was polite, his posture softer, his ego quieter. Yet as the evening progressed, an invisible weight pressed on him, the knowledge that he owed something more than gestures. Every time he caught sight of Maria across the room, surrounded by employees who adored her, the guilt in his chest deepened. He had built an empire, but she had rebuilt its soul. When the lights dimmed and the microphone was handed to him, Richard's palms felt cold. He cleared his throat, beginning with the usual corporate gratitude, growth, performance, partnerships. Then he paused, his gaze sweeping over the audience. "There's something else I need to say tonight," he began, his voice steadier than he felt. The room fell silent. He looked toward Maria, who sat near the back, eyes calm but curious. "Some time ago," he continued, "I made a mistake, a public one. I humiliated someone who worked in this company, someone far wiser than I was. That moment changed me." A murmur spread through the crowd. Richard inhaled, the truth heavy but liberating. "That person reminded me that respect is not a favor. It's a duty." Maria lowered her gaze slightly, her expression unreadable. Around her people turned, whispering, realizing who he meant. Richard's voice trembled as he went on. "She taught me that intelligence wears no uniform, and that dignity can't be bought or buried. Tonight I want to thank her publicly, not because it's good for business, but because it's good for the soul." The audience erupted into soft applause. Richard gestured toward her. "Maria, would you join me?" he asked. The spotlight found her as she rose slowly, each step deliberate. The room parted to make way for her. The same people who once overlooked her now watching in awe. She walked with poise, the light glinting off her calm, unflinching eyes. On stage, Richard extended his hand. For a moment, time seemed to hold its breath. Maria accepted it, not out of forgiveness, but completion. "Thank you," he said quietly, the microphone barely catching his voice. She looked at him, her expression serene. "Respect," she replied, "doesn't need translation." The audience fell into a hush that spoke louder than applause. Then, as if released, the entire room rose in a standing ovation. Some clapped, others wiped their eyes. The echo of it filled the hall like a tide of recognition, not just for Maria, but for everyone who had ever been unseen. She didn't smile widely, but the faint curve of her lips carried more power than any speech could. Richard stepped back, letting her stand alone beneath the lights. The glow framed her like the heroine of a story, long overdue for justice. She didn't bask in it. She simply stood there, strong and still, a testament to quiet resilience. For once, power looked like grace. In the crowd, Sophia watched her mother through tearful eyes, clapping until her small hands stung. Maria found her in the audience and smiled, the kind of smile that said everything words could not. The journey was complete, not in victory, but in dignity reclaimed. The applause faded slowly, but the silence that followed was full of awe, truth, and respect. Months passed, and the memory of that night lived quietly in the halls of Hale Industries. The story of the cleaning lady who spoke 9 languages became legend, whispered to new employees, retold in interviews, repeated like a modern parable. But for Maria, life had returned to its gentle rhythm. She preferred Peace over praise, truth over titles. Fame had never been her goal, only dignity. Each morning she arrived early, greeting the security guard by name, walking through the same marble floors she once polished. Now people stopped to chat, to ask about words, idioms, cultures. She turned every small moment into a lesson, every conversation into a bridge. The building no longer felt like a fortress. It felt human again. And though the work remained demanding, it no longer drained. It grounded her. Sophia thrived, bright and curious, her report cards filled with A's and notes that said, "A natural linguist." Sometimes Maria caught her daughter teaching her friends bits of Spanish and French on the playground, her voice full of the same warmth Maria once had in her classrooms. Watching her, Maria felt the quiet satisfaction of a promise kept, the seed of knowledge planted, now blooming in another generation. One afternoon, while cleaning her desk, she found an envelope without a name. Inside was a short note written in Richard's familiar handwriting. "Thank you for reminding me what leadership really means." There was no signature, no formality, just sincerity. Maria smiled softly and tucked the note into her drawer. Redemption, she thought, didn't always need witnesses. Weeks later, she visited a local community center that offered night classes. The director greeted her warmly. "You're the woman from the news, aren't you? The translator." Maria laughed lightly. "Just someone who loves languages," she replied. When he asked if she'd be interested in teaching free courses for immigrant workers, her eyes filled with quiet joy. "Yes," she said, "that's exactly what I want to do." Soon, the classroom filled with people from every corner of the world, construction workers, caregivers, delivery drivers, mothers. She taught them how to greet, to write, to express themselves without fear. The chalk squeaked against the board like music. For every word learned, Maria saw confidence bloom. It wasn't a job, it was healing, for them and for her. At work, Richard continued his quiet transformation. He funded Maria's community program anonymously, sending monthly donations without a word. The company newsletter highlighted her classes, calling her an inspiration. Maria deflected the attention, always redirecting it toward her students. "They're the real story," she'd say. "They're learning how to be heard." On quiet evenings, she and Sophia would walk home together, the city glowing in the distance. "Mama," Sophia said once, "do you miss teaching at the university?" Maria smiled. "No, mi amor, I'm teaching where I'm needed." The girl nodded, slipping her hand into her mother's. Their steps matched in rhythm, a melody of past and future walking side by side. As the years went on, people came and went, but Maria's presence remained constant, the steady heartbeat of integrity in a world too often distracted by noise. Her story became less about humiliation and triumph, and more about what endures when pride fades, kindness, humility, and the unshakable power of words. And sometimes, in the quiet after class, Maria would look out the window at the city lights and whisper softly, "To speak is to live." She thought of all the languages. She knew all the voices she had heard and given space to. Each one carried a truth, and in that truth she found her peace, proof that the quietest voices really do speak the loudest truths.